Alright everybody, so this will be the third and final video as part of this lecture segment. The topic that we're going to kind of go through is this idea of passing complex information from a child form back to a main form. The child form will actually be the prominent focus of this particular video, and this one probably will run to about 20 minutes. But the idea here is that we actually are able to package up a whole collection of information and send it from one form to another. So the forms that we have currently, our main form and our child form, are pretty simplistic. What I would like to do in this case is demonstrate how we can maybe do more of an add form. Our child form becomes more of an data entry form, and then our main form becomes more of a display form. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of these controls that are on our main form and I'm going to replace it with a button and a list box. Now the button will be btn add, and we'll make these students. Add student. And then this list box will represent a collection of students. And just to identify that, I'll add a label here, and I'll just call it students. So just giving a visual representation to this box so that people understand that this is a list box full of students. Alright, so that'll be our main form. The concept will be that you click add student and we'll get a child dialog box that will come up, and that dialog box will then allow us to put in student information. We'll click the submit button on the child form, and then it will pass back to us that student, and we'll represent that student in our list box. So from our child form what we'll need is, we won't need the label and the agree button, but what we will need is a submit and cancel button, and then we will also need a series of text boxes and labels. Now, a shorthand way of adding a number of similar or same controls to a form is to go to the toolbox and just double click on the control you want to add, and it will allow you to add multiple copies of that control to a form. So I have probably about 6 text boxes here. The next thing you can do is I have lassoed them all together so that I've made one unit of selection. I can right click on this unit and I can bring them to the front. I can then come up to my toolbar, and using the toolbar across the top here for alignment, I can align them all to the left. I can then grab the one at the very bottom and move it in alignment to the bottom of where I want my last box to appear. I can then lasso them all together again, and then using the toolbar option of make them vertically equally spaced, I can click that and it will equally distribute all of my text boxes across my form. So that makes it a lot easier than going and dragging the controls one by one and trying to get the alignment so correct. This will get you exactly where you want to be, and since they're all lassoed, I can also resize all of the controls by grabbing the anchor points on the left and right and dragging them out. The labels, I'm going to actually do the same thing. I'll lasso them all together. I will then left align them all. I'm going to scoot them over to the left, and then I'm going to grab this final one and drag it down here. I'm going to grab the rest of them, and I'm going to actually move them all as a collective unit, moving the first label just above the first text box. I now hold shift and click on label 6, so I've now collected or grabbed all of the labels. I can then hit the vertically spaced equally spaced, and it should distribute all of my labels pretty close. It's not exactly where I want them to be, but it definitely beats the amount of dragging and moving I would have to do with each one. So I can just use my arrow keys. If you hold down Control, you get a little bit more of a step than you do with just tapping arrow keys, and that will help you align your labels to where you'd like them. And I'm actually short one. I had 7 boxes, so I'll just grab my label tool and I'll just drag a 7th label out here. So simple enough. Now I'm going to go through real quick and I'm going to give each one of these boxes a name. So I'll call this TXT first name, TXT last name, TXT address, TXT city, TXT state, TXT phone, and finally TXT email. And I will do the same for my labels. I will go through, and I'm not so concerned at this point around the label names, but I am interested in the label text. So I will call this labels text first name. And what I'm doing here is I'm building labels to describe the text boxes. Last name, address, city, state, phone, and email. Alright. So I now have a child form for adding students. I'm actually going to change the text of this child form to add new student. And I'm going to change the text of this OK button to say submit. So I now have 2 forms, FRM child, which will be our add new students, and FRM main, which will list all of the students that we've added. And I'm ready to set up the event handler for the button add student. You'll notice in here we still have the old submit button event handler. I'm going to delete that first. We don't need to confuse ourselves with additional code. So under btn add student underscore click, the add student button event handler, what we're going to do is we will open the add student dialog box. We will capture the dialog result. If the result is okay, we will update the list box with the new student. And otherwise we will not do anything. So pretty straightforward. So to open that dialog box, again, we will create an instance variable of the FRM child class, and this time we will call it add student. And it's giving me a red swiggle error because we still have the constructor in here set to require a parameter. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that, as well as the property. And I'm also going to delete everything out of the btn OK click event. So that'll correct that problem for us. So we now have a form. We can then declare our dialog result variable, and we'll just go ahead and set that equal to add student.showDialog, which will then show our dialog and allow us to capture the result. And then we'll say if dialog result equals OK, do this, and then it's kind of an implicit else, do nothing. All right. So inside of here, we want to update our list box. Now, our list box 1 is the name of our box. We can do simply an items.add. And what we're going to add inside of here is a student object. That student object is going to be an object or a class that we're going to have to create. So to do that, we're going to right click on the week 6 app, do an add, and we're going to add a class. And we'll just call our class student.cs. So we start out with a blank template class, very simple, very straightforward, public class student. I'm going to quickly go through and shorthand some properties that match up to the text boxes that we actually have on our add new student form. First name, last name, address, city, state, phone, and email. For the sake of time and simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and make all of these strings. So I'll do prop, string, first name, prop, string, last name, string, address, prop, double tab, string, city, prop, double tab, string, tab, double tab, state, prop, double tab, string, double tab, phone, prop, string, email. Alright, so that is now created for us our properties for our class. Perfect. Now off of FRM child, when we click OK, what we want to do is we want to create an instance of a child class that will be the package that we want to return back to FRM main. Now to do that, we can go about it a few ways. There's multiple ways of creating instances of classes, and I'm going to give you an example of each one of those ways. Neither one is better than the other. It really all comes down to circumstance and which one works best for you. Now traditionally, you've probably seen something that looks like this. Equals new, and then student is the class. So we've created an instance variable called newStu, and it's of type student. We now can say newStu.firstName equals txt firstname.text, newStu.lastName equals txt lastname.text, newStu.address equals txt address.text, newStu.city equals txt city.text. And you get the idea that, going forward, how you would do that. Now, this works fine. It's a little cumbersome having to type newStu every time. And the fact that we're basically doing it to initialize this class, it becomes relatively redundant. And all of these lines of code work together and are part of the same collection, or part of the same purpose, which is to initialize the student object. But there is a newer alternative way of doing that inside of C#. So we can do student newStu, just as we did before, equals new student. But instead of doing open parenthesis, close parenthesis, semicolon, we'll actually do an open curly bracket, and then we will hit enter just as if it was a method or an if statement, and follow it by a semicolon. And in between the curly brackets, we now have access to every property, public property of this class. So just as we did before where we kept saying newStu.firstName equals, we can simply put in here firstName equals txt firstname.text. And now the difference is you'd use a comma, lastName equals txt lastname.text, address equals txt address.text, city, state, phone, and email. And this chunk of code here performs the exact same function as the example above. It's a little less typing, it's a little more concise. Again, either option works perfectly fine. whatever is your preference. Personally, I find this syntax tends to be a little easier, and it's a little easier to read and understand as well. So, moving forward, we then want to take that student property that we've just that student variable that we've just created, and we want to set it equal to something so that we can pass it back to the main form. Now, to do that, we could go about a few different ways. We could create a public property, such as public student, new student, and what would happen is this will contain a new student object when the dialog result is okay. So from here, we would simply say this dialog result equals okay. And then that's all we would do from the child form side. Oh, I'm sorry. And then obviously we would say new student equals new stu, setting the public property equal to the local variable. From form main, we would then jump back over here and we would say add student, the form from above, dot new student is, I'll just store it in a local variable called s, so we'll set s equal to that new student property, and then inside of the list box we can pass s in as a new item in the list box, do an F6, and aside from these two, which are not relevant, we have no compile errors. We can then run our app, click add student, and fill out our form. We can then submit our form, and actually I'm going to put some breakpoints in here. So we're now at this stage of our code. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, here, and here. Click submit. Returns us a dialog result of OK. We'll then step down to the next line. We have the new student property, which has a student object in it with our information. Step down to the next line. S is now equal to new student, and then we will add the S student object to our list box. Play. Now what happens is that this is our object inside the list box, but it's showing the class name or the type, not our information. To correct that, it's pretty simple and straightforward. If we go back into our student, and if you recall from previous lectures, every object in the .NET Framework inherits, or I'm sorry, every class from within the .NET Framework inherits from system.object. And in system.object, there's a method that always comes along for the ride on every class, and it's the toString method. By default, toString will call the getType method, and the getType method provides type information, including the full name of the class, and it simply just spits out the class name, which is what we saw before. We said week 6 app.student. What we want to do is we want to override toString and change it to first name plus last name. And what this will do then is if we run again, add student, and fill out our form, and hit submit, We'll walk through our breakpoints. It will now spit out the student name. So that is a basic mechanic of how to pass information back and forth between forms. I'm kind of up on my 20 minutes, so I don't want to go into too much more detail for this lecture, but there is an alternative way that involves setting up events and using events and event handlers and event arguments to pass information back and forth between forms. We'll get into that in week 8 after the midterm assignment, and we'll move forward from there on how to develop applications, integrate and utilize databases as well as printers, more file input output, and we'll talk about additional features of the .NET Framework. Thanks, have a great week, and be sure to look for the midterm assignment that should be posted either later today or tomorrow. Thanks.